Alright, hello everybody. This is Antonio Wolf. We are looking at the philosophy of nature. Starting chapter 1, skipping the introduction. Y'all can read the introduction yourselves. Here I'll streaming the text for anybody who wants to follow along. Chapter 1, Space and Time, Mathematical Mechanics. Interesting thing, math arises here along with nature. Unlike other people, well, no, I mean, this is a common view nowadays. It was only about the time of Russell that people thought that there was an identity between logic and mathematics, that mathematics could be a completely logical science. Then that whole project of logicism fell apart between Whitehead and Russell trying to write Principia Mathematica. And both of them went their own way. And then, like, from that, the logicist project fell apart. The formalist project starts with an H. Hilbert took over, and then, despite the fact that apparently also fell to the wayside eventually, a lot of the stuff from that project still seems to be pretty strongly dominant, even though many people don't explicitly, like, follow the formalist project. Anyways. It's completely tangential. So A, space. The primary or immediate determination of nature is the abstract universality of its self-externality, its unmediated indifference, that is, space. It is on account of its being self-externality that space constitutes collaterality of a completely ideal nature. As this extrinsicality is still completely abstract, space is simply continuous and is devoid of any determinate difference. A lot of terms there from the science of logic, which Hegel just assumes that you know. You could also not know them, and this will still make perfect sense. One, space is the most minimal conceptual thing that defines nature. You can't really begin with time because time reduces to some kind of spatial determination, at least here, because we're talking about here external time. Internal time is related to that, but is not exactly identical. You know, that would be called psychological time. Hegel does comment on it in the remarks. So, begin with nature. The immediate determination is the abstract universality of its self-externality. The universality here would just be the abstract universal that he talks about in Science of Logic, which is, you give some kind of unity, but you haven't even said what exactly the unity is in any concrete sense. There's been no self-development, and it's just the immediate universality, which is self-externality. The self-externality of the idea. It's unmediated indifference, space, because space is only in relationship to space itself. Space is external to what? Space. One portion of space outside another portion of space. It is on account of its being self-externality. The space constitutes collaterality of a completely ideal nature. Collaterality, quite literally, being side by side with. The ideal nature is that the portions of space that you divide as saying here's one space outside another is completely ideal in that it is subject to you picking it out. The moment you pick it out in the relationships of like space itself, any portion that would be picked out immediately dissolves into other portions which dissolve and just keep dissolving. And there is no independent unit of space which is like, oh, here's one unit of space as such, what people would call like the Planck length or whatever, which is absolute nonsense. And there's another unit of space. Space just keeps falling apart. None of these end up being real in a substantive sense. So he says, as this extrinsicality is still completely abstract, space is simply continuous and is devoid of any determinate difference, and nothing special is really meant by continuity there. Just take it on its regular face. The remark is a bit about Kant and Leibniz, a little bit of Newton, just kind of going about how there is absolute space doesn't make any sense. I'm going to skip the remark and the addition. So we begin with space, self-externality. So section 255. Space is implicitly the notion in general. Notion is concept, and as such has the differences of the notion within itself. In its indifference, it has them immediately as the three dimensions, which are merely different and quite devoid of determination. I won't comment on that. He basically gives in 256. So, section 256. Spatial difference is, however, essentially determinate and qualitative. As such, it is 1. In the first instance, the point. That is, the negation of the immediate and undifferentiated self-externality of space itself. 2. The negation is, however, the negation of space, and is therefore itself spatial, in that this relation is essential to the point. The point is self-sublating and constitutes the line, which is the primary otherness or spatial being of the point. 3. The truth of otherness is, however, the negation of negation, and the line therefore passes over into the plane. Although one aspect of the plane is that it constitutes surface in general, in that it is a determinateness opposed to line and point, it also has the aspect of being the transcendent negation of space, or the reinstatement of the spatial totality, which now has the negative moment within it. It is therefore an enclosing surface, which divides off and separates a distinct part of space. Right, there's quite a bit of there. You want to take a stab at speculating what that means, Iapetus?
I follow up until the third point. I'm still trying to understand it, but it seems like he's describing developing the three dimensions. You know, the point is one-dimensional, and it's spatial because you can't have anything outside of space. So a point that negates space is also constituted by space. And then the next dimension, line, which is two-dimensional, and then the plane. The third point I'm still reading over.
Yeah, so going back to 255. I don't like when he does this because it's I know why he does it. It does make sense, but when you're trying to first present these things, I don't think you should state them this way, because he's appealing to stuff already worked out in the science of logic, and it's difficult for people to follow if they haven't done that already. And even if they have done that already, it's kind of pointless. It's kind of like a pointless exercise of erudition in my view. It kind of shows the unity between what he's doing here and how it connects to what's in the prior stuff as an application or an instantiation. Instantiation would be better, not an application. So he says the difference is the notion within itself. In its indifference, it has them immediately as the three dimensions, which are merely different and quite devoid. The three dimensions he means is length, breadth, length, width, height. And they're indifferent in that you can swap them with each other and nothing changes. And if you notice, that he says, this appeals to the notion in general, the concept in general. It is an external reflection. Then it's 256 where he makes the actual derivation, where he says, okay, spatial difference, however, essentially determinate and qualitative. As such, it is 1. In the first instance, the point, that is the negation of the immediate and undifferentiated self-externality of space itself. Two ways to view this. One of them is, think about this. Okay, space is self-externality. Now, given that obviously space here is the self-externality of the idea, and don't mind what that actually means. It really, that's a whole different can of worms. And you don't really need it for this point. So think about this. Okay, you have space, a totality of space. Abstractly. If you stand back and you try to, like observe this totality of space, what does it look like? What does space look like from the non-spatial perspective outside of space? Well, it's space, it's there. But since you're outside of space, beholding space, it's non-spatial. Well, a non-spatial space is what we just call a point. Zero dimensionality. Now, in order to be able to make the step of a space outside of space, such that one portion of space appears to you as non-spatial, you yourself have to be in some kind of spatial positionality to view the point as a point. But in order to have a point that is distinct from another point, you have to have a space that divides them. Otherwise, you collapse everything to one point. You can't really get out. So you have to have the one dimension to divide the zero dimensional. Otherwise, you can't even have the zero dimensional to begin with. There is no externality. Then from that, the next thing is negation is, however, the negation of space, and is therefore itself spatial, in that this relation is essential to the point. The point is self-sublating. It constitutes a line, if insofar as the point is pointed, it is so through the line, which is the primary otherness or spatial being of the point. The truth of otherness, however, the negation of negation. And the line, therefore, passes over into the plane. So, just as, for the point to be pointed out, you need to have the one dimension to be able to point it out from another point so that it exists in the first place. In order to point out the line, you have to also be within the plane to point out the line. And then the plane has this, he calls it negation of negation. Although one aspect of the plane is that it constitutes surface in general, in that it is a determinate opposed to line and point, it also has the aspect of being the transcended negation of space, or the reinstatement of that spatial totality, which now has the negative moment within it. It is therefore an enclosing surface which divides off and separates a distinct part of space. So the reason he doesn't go up to the volume here, which I would think that he would, but he doesn't. And this is the first time that I've read this in a long time, and now it kind of strikes me that related to what he says in 255, probably the reason he doesn't see this is that the abstract three-dimensionality, the immediate three-dimensionality of length, breadth, width, which makes no difference, these three define each dimensionality itself, like each dimension. So these are dimensions within the three general dimensions. You can specify length, breadth, and width. The planes, these form, one totality of like those directions. When you take the plane, what you can do with the plane is you can then enclose it and fold it upon itself through length, breadth, length, width, and height. And you can make a complete enclosing surface, and there's nothing more that you really need to say. Like, that itself will constitute the volume. So, yeah. And the fact that he just gone onto the volume, I think you can directly see how the length, width, and height basically arise as the directions possible within the volume, and how you can then take the surface of a plane and enclose a full space. Makes sense? Hello, hello.
Yep.
We will skip the remarks, go down to time. 257. So the negativity which relates itself to space as point and develops determinations within it as line and plane is, however, also a being for self within the sphere of self-externality. It posits its determinations within space, but at the same time in conformity with the sphere of self-externality, and is therefore apparently indifferent to the immobile collaterality of space. Thus posited for itself, this negativity is time. This is a mind bender, because there's a few very interesting things that you can interpret out of this one. And this one basically is taking two formal aspects that happen throughout the entire logic. Not formal because Hegel's like formally deploying them, but formal because you can see this form arise in basically every movement. There's the movement which grasps activity, and there's the movement that grasps that activity as a substantial, well, real thing. Like for example, with being and nothing, you kind of first treat them as substantial. In becoming, you treat them as pure activity. Then with becoming to existence, you take that activity and you treat it as a substance again. And you can you switch back and forth in every movement between an active dynamic side and a substantial static side. So in the very movement between the point, the line, the plane, the very movement that's happening there as you think it, and which is ontologically also happening there, not in a temporal sense, but just in a generative sense. That movement itself now is taken from the substantiality that appears as space and is appearing on its own as pure movement itself. He calls it just the pure negativity. Such that this reverses space into being the externalization of time. So what space is frozen time. If you can view that not only as strips, like the typical view that people have, it's just like strips in a movie film, which we don't have movie films anymore. So that doesn't quite work these days as an analogy. But just still frames of a video. But this is more radical than that. This says not only is the totality of the still frame, the externalization and substantialization of time, each space there that you see collateral with each other, the pixels on your screen of the frozen image, are themselves there only by the self-externalizing power of time, which is frozen space as its moments too. So the zero dimensionality, one dimensionality, two dimensionality, which is present in any total frame of space, is itself just also another moment of frozen time. I don't know if that's clear or not.
Makes sense to me.
So, one of the analogies that I thought is you can kind of think about this if you have an apple, the physicality of the extension of the apple in space is itself frozen time. Not at this time or at another time. The extension itself, the spatiality itself, is frozen time. It's kind of weird when you first think about it, but it makes sense. Probably easier to just grasp it as if you take the totality of space, with all dimensions, space is self-external, The negativity doesn't stop there. Is there a sense to saying that space is outside of space in a non-spatial way? Yes, we call that time. (258) Time as a negative unity of self-externality is also purely abstract and of an ideal nature. It is the being which, in that it is not, in that it is not, is. It is intuited becoming. Admittedly, its differences are therefore determined as being simply momentary, in that they immediately sublate themselves in their externality, however, they are self-external. So this thing, time as a negative unity of self-externality is also purely abstract and of an ideal nature. The moments of time don't exist collateral to each other in a real sense either. These are all just subject to these processes in which, the moment you think you've grasped one moment, they're gone. The moment you think you've grasped a unit of space, it dissolves away into more space. The moment you think you've grabbed a moment of time, it's dissolved into another moment of time. And then these moments have no existence outside of their totality as a process, which is just this endless dissolving into others. Okay, this remark might be good. So, time, like space, is a pure form of sensibility or intuition. It is the insensible factor in sensibility. It's a reference to Kant. That's Kant's view, is that time is a pure form of intuition, and there is an internal intuition as opposed to space, which is an external intuition. Like space, however, time does not involve the difference between objectivity and distinct subjective consciousness. If these determinations were to be applied to space and time, the first would be abstract objectivity and the second abstract subjectivity. Time is the same principle as the ego equals ego of pure self-consciousness, but as time, this principle, or the simple concept, is still completely external and abstract as mere intuitive becoming. It is pure being in self as a plain self-production. Being in self, I assume it's being in itself, meaning that, all these, he says, it's the same kind of principle as the ego equals equals, the I equals I, self-consciousness. But, this is one of those things in which people might go it's like at the end of the philosophy, the phenomenology of spirit, he says weird things like, spirit is time itself, in the historical process, and people misunderstand that kind of stuff. It's analogical, it's not a direct identity. Here he's saying, it's kind of in the end, it's going to be the same process as the I equals I or self-consciousness, but here, as time, this process determined as time, it's just a simple concept, it's still completely external, abstract, it's merely intuitive becoming. It is pure being in self, and as a plain self-production, in that, all that it is produced by time is just more time. Time just becomes more time. Time is as continuous as space is, for it is abstract negation relating itself to itself, and in this abstraction there is yet no difference of a real nature. This is also to say that natural time is... has no arrow of time. It has no distinction between moments. One moment of time is no different by any order or any structure from another moment of time. And here it's just one empty space, dimensional space, with another empty dimensional space. They're all the same. Each moment of time is all the same. You might make some quibbles, they're not numerically the same or whatever. Doesn't matter. That's why they're continuous. There's a break in that, like, here's a moment and there's a moment, and yet each moment just melds into the other moments, and they're indistinct in that, it's the same thing relating to itself anyways. It is said that everything arises and passes away in time, and that if one abstracts from everything, that is to say, from the content of time and space, then empty time and empty space will be left. That is, time and space are posited as abstractions of externality, and represented as if they were for themselves. But everything does not appear and pass in time. And by the way, the reference there is to Jacobi. Jacobi mentions the thought experiment of that kind, which kind of drove him nuts. He had a mental breakdown because of it. But everything does not appear and pass in time. Time itself is this becoming, arising, passing away. It is the abstraction which has being, the chronos, which engenders all and destroys that to which it gives birth. That which is of a real nature is certainly distinguished from time, but is just as essentially identical with time. It is limited, and the other involved in this negation is outside it. Consequently, the determinateness is implicitly external to itself, and is therefore the contradiction of its being. Time itself consists in the abstraction and contradiction of this externality, in the restlessness of this contradiction. That which is finite is transitory and temporal because, unlike the concept, it is not in itself total negativity. It certainly contains negativity as its universal essence, but as it is not adequate to this essence and is one-sided, it relates itself to negativity as to its power. The concept, however, in its freely existing identity with itself, as ego equals ego, I equals I, is in for itself absolute negativity and freedom, and is consequently not only free from the power of time, but is neither within time nor something temporal. It can be said on the contrary that it is the concept which constitutes the power of time, for time is nothing but this negation as externality. Only that which is natural, in that it is finite, is subject to time. That which is true, however, the idea, spirit, is eternal. The concept of eternity should not, however, be grasped negatively as the abstraction of time, and as if it existed outside time, nor should it be grasped in the sense of its coming after time, for by placing eternity in the future, one turns it into a moment of time. So there you go. I mean, if anybody wants to know, how does Hegel relate to, say, something like relativity? Basically, these comments are refuting that there could be any connection between his understanding of time and stuff like relativistic time. For Einstein, space and time are containers. Hegel says here that these are not containers, these are the existence of things themselves. He says things don't pass away in time, rather, but everything does not appear and pass in time. Time itself is this becoming, arising and passing away. It is the abstraction which has being. So, an apple has a whole cycle of, growth from seed to tree to creating apples and rotting and all these other things. Not because it is in time, but because apples are finite things which pass away. That is their temporality itself. So time arises out of things, not things arising out of time. We'll read the addition. Time does not resemble a container in which everything is, as it were, borne away and swallowed up in the flow of a stream. Time is merely this abstraction of destroying. Things are in time because they are finite. They do not pass away because they are in time, but are themselves that which is temporal. Temporality is their objective determination. It is therefore the process of actual things which constitutes time, and if it can be said that time is omnipotent, it must be added that it is completely impotent. The present makes a tremendous demand, yet as the individual present, it is nothing. For even as I pronounce it, its all-excluding pretentiousness dwindles, dissolves, and falls into dust. It is the universality of these present moments which lasts, and the sublatedness of this process of things which does not. Even if things endure, time does not rest, but continues to pass, and it is because of this that it appears to be distinct and independent of things. If we say that time continues to pass even if things endure, however, we are merely saying that although some things endure, change appears in other things, as for example the course of the sun, so that things still remain in time. The attribution of gradual change is employed as a last resort in order to endow things with stillness and permanence. If all stood still, even our thinking, we would be permanent, and there would be no time. But all finite things are temporal, as sooner or later they all are subject to change, and their permanence is therefore only relative. Absolute timelessness is eternity, which is devoid of natural time, and is therefore to be distinguished from duration. In its concept, time itself is eternal, however, for its concept is neither the present nor any other time, but time as such. Its concept is, like all concept, eternal, and thus constitutes the absolute present. Eternity will not be, nor has it been, it is. Duration is therefore to be distinguished from eternity, in that it is merely a relative sublation of time. Eternity is, however, infinite, that is to say, not relative, but intro-reflected duration. That which is not in time is without process. The most imperfect, the most perfect, is not in time and therefore endures. The most imperfect, like the most perfect, is not in time and therefore endures. The most imperfect endures because it is an abstract universality, such as space and time itself. The sun, the elements, stones, mountains, inorganic nature in general, as well as works of man, such as pyramids, have a barren duration. That which endures is regarded more highly than that which soon passes. But all blossom, all that is exquisite in living being, dies early. The most perfect also endures, however, not only in the lifeless inorganic universal, but also in the other inherently concrete universal of the genus, the law, the idea, and the spirit. We have to decide whether something is the whole process or merely one moment of it. As law, the universal is also inherently process and lives only as process. But it is not part of the process. It is not within the process. It contains its double aspect and is itself without process. In its phenomenal aspect, law falls within time, because the moments of the concept show themselves as independent, but in their concept the excluded differences reconcile and relate themselves, and are harmoniously reassimilated. The idea or spirit is above time because it is itself the concept of time. In and for itself it is eternal and unbreached by time, because it does not lose itself in its own side of the process. This is not the case with the individual as such, on one side of which is the genus. The finest life is that which completely unites its individuality and the universal into one form. The individual is not then the same as the universal, however, and is therefore one side of the process, or mutability, in accordance with which mortal moment it falls within time. Achilles, the flower of Greek life, and the infinitely powerful personality of Alexander the Great are no more, and only their deeds and influences remain through the world that they have brought into being. Mediocrity endures and finally governs the world. Thought also displays this mediocrity, with which it pesters the world about it, and which survives by extinguishing spiritual liveliness and turning it into a flat formality. It endures precisely because it rests in untruth, never acquires its right, fails to honor the concept, and never realizes the process of the truth within it. Cold and pessimistic words for the world. That was a really long addition. Pretty straightforward. The thing about eternity is interesting. You have to understand that what he said there is that something, spirit is itself eternal. There are like sub-levels, different levels of eternity, right? So you and I as a consciousness, we literally hold time within us. We are the temporality of the world. In consciousness is the entire world. Outside and the entire internal world as well. All the changes that happen there, that happen within our mind. Not individual, but within mind in general. We ourselves are then self-observant as bodies within time, and the bodies are obviously temporal or spatial, so they suffer the issues of temporality. Insofar as our conscious only beholds physical phenomena, natural phenomena, all those things just do nothing but come and go, come and go. when spirit beholds spirit, you behold things that don't come and go. When you behold spiritual things, you're starting to behold concepts. You don't behold this or that orange, this or that tree. You start to behold the entire living process of orange trees. And the living process of orange trees will go on for far longer than any singular orange tree at all. Likewise, when you understand that this is what you are, you behold yourself in your eternal form. Eternity is present. This has something to do with, as you might know, from stuff like where, Jesus says the kingdom of God is within you. It's not something for the afterlife. It is quite literally possible to have it present now. For any of you that are communists, that last thing about mediocrity enduring and finally governing the world, Hegel says, the finest life is that which completely unites with individuality and universal into one form. The individual is not then the same as universal, however, and is therefore one side of the process or mutability in accordance with which a mortal moment it falls within time. So you can live the perfect life. You can be the perfect person. Your life may be shit like Jesus's, or your life may be great. You may be blessed with, just having a wonderful life. You live in a wonderful time. But because you're still limited by physical nature, that you are embodied here as an individual body, you will die. And because the state is also embodied here in the natural world, it too must die. And one of the things that true things do, when you recognize I am indeed just an individual of this eternal reality, you don't cling to life. This is not something he talks about here. It's things that he talks about in the philosophy of religion, I think, that I've seen excerpts from. You're good with how things are. You realize God is in charge of everything. All things are good. Providence knows what's up. I don't have to worry. So you don't hold on to your own life, and you don't hold on to the things that are falling apart, because you realize that's just what things do. And people like Marxists and other utopians, and yes, I know Marxists, well, we're not utopians. Yes, you are. Shut the fuck up. Yes, you are. Everything people think about communism is nothing but utopia. Like, oh, well, there will be problems. This just won't be the problems we have. You can't have a perfect state. It's just basically it. Will there be non-capitalist states in the future? Probably. Will they look at anything at all like what the communists think? Probably not. But those things will pass too. It doesn't matter how perfect we make our bodies. It doesn't matter how perfect we make our societies. They all come and go. And in the end, mediocrity endures. Because mediocrity is the only thing that, one, you don't have to work very hard to maintain it. And two, you don't have to work very hard to get it. Whereas, perfection takes a lot of work. And not many people are committed to it, and not many people are capable of it. So, no matter how good you make things, they will fall apart. How much more time we got, Epirus?
Around an hour.
Oh, okay, so we got plenty of time. Yeah, we'll definitely finish this. So, 259. The present, future, and past, the dimensions of time, constitute the becoming of externality as such, and its dissolution into the differences of being as passing over into nothing, and of nothing as passing over into being. The immediate disappearance of these differences into individuality is the present as now, which, as it excludes individuality, and is at the same time simply continuous on the other moments, is itself merely the disappearance of its being into nothing, and of nothing into being. We won't read the remark. In the remark, he explains that the dimensions of time are as indifferent as the dimensions that he mentions in space, where, length, width, height, you can swap them. They don't matter. It makes no difference. They are different, but they're also not different. Likewise, present, future, and past are different, but not different. In the pure time of nature, what you have is, here's one totality of space, here's another totality of space. They become out of one to the other. There is no order. There is no difference. The present and the future and the past they all look the same. They all operate the same. If you swap them around, it would make no difference. The difference of these moments is entirely in psychology. It's entirely in the mind of consciousness, which has memory and which has expectations of a future on a categorical sense. So like I said earlier, there is no arrow of time in here. If you take this form of time and you say, well, what if, so we have an objective natural form of time, like, well, what if time flowed in reverse to whatever it's going right now? It would literally look the same. A lot of people think like, oh, it would look like a movie going backwards. No. What would happen is if you are consistent with the thought experiment, you would reverse everything. So now you would remember the future, but you wouldn't remember the past because the past is now your future. And if you were consistent with the ways of things that operate, logically speaking, things go from childhood to adulthood. They don't go from adulthood to childhood. That's not the logic that works. So everything else might be reversed physically in its order, but on the level of the laws of biology, the laws of memory and expectation, those can't be reversed, and those actually overdetermine the way in which you will experience natural time. So you can reverse natural time. It's like shooting a cannonball. Shoot it forward, shoot it backwards, it all follows the same arc. So, yeah, everything will look the same. Wouldn't really work any differently. Okay, there's some... This remarks about math. That's worth reading. The finite present is a now, fixed as being, and is a concrete unity distinguished from the negative, the abstract moments of the past and the future. It is therefore the affirmative factor, yet in itself this being is merely abstract and disappears into nothing. This is to say, against the common intuition, people think that you start from the present, and from the present flows the past and the future, or rather... Well, no, there is two senses which people normally have. One of them is to see like this abstract presentism, that the present is a moment among time like the others. And there's another one in which the present isn't real, and what you have is just a past sequence generating some future sequence, and the present is just the slice of time in which you happen to be as a spectator. Hegel's position is that you have the past and the future, which would be one total space A, and the future, which would be total space B. And the present is the process which unifies and distinguishes and generates that past and the future. So in Hegel's position, it is in the present that the past and the future, the moments of time, are literally generated as existent in the first place. But it's not a separate time among them. It's not a separate space among spaces. It is the very generating process of spaces themselves. So the present is a result, but in being the result, it's also the presupposition of the past and the future. Incidentally, these dimensions do not occur in nature, where time is now as separately subsistent differences, for they are only necessary in subjective representation in memory and in fear or hope. The past and the future of time are space, and insofar as they have being in nature, for space is negated time, just as sublated space is initially the point, which develops for itself its time. There is no science of time corresponding to geometry. the science of space. Temporal differences do not have this indifference of self-externality which constitutes the immediate determinability of space, and unlike this determinability, do not therefore give rise to figurations. Time first becomes capable of such figurations when the understanding paralyzes it and reduces its negativity to a unit. This dead unity sorry, lost my place. This dead unity, which is thought's highest externality, gives rise to external combinations. These are the figurations of arithmetic, which may be applied to by the understanding to the equality and inequality, identity and difference. Kant also grounds mathematics in the intuition of time itself, pure moments of time. So there are weird people who want to treat time like geometry, and they're like, what if there were like 2 dimensions of time? And there are physical, quote-unquote, theories that purport to do this, but you can't. The very understanding what time is makes it impossible. There is no line of time, there is no arrow of time. In a substantive sense, there aren't moments of time. You don't have the film problem where here's, time moment A and time moment B, and there's somewhere that we call time. Time is itself just an incessant point that just regenerates itself as a point. There aren't points along with it. It is just a singular abstract point if you want to treat it spatially. So at any time, there really is only one point in time, and the way time manifests itself spatially is not just simply in the total division of space, abstracted from itself as moments, but in the very extension of space itself. So, if you wanted to have understand the temporality of the apple, the question is not about abstract points of space and its configurations. The temporality of the apple has to do with the understanding of the logical development of what it is to be an apple, how it goes from seed to sapling to tree and all these other things. That is what is the power that is driving the physical change of space becoming other than its own configuration at any moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, roughly.
Roughly, is there anything else that you would want some comments on?
The thing is, these words are conjuring images into mind. The structures, especially the structures of time and space. But I don't think I can articulate those structures enough to ask questions enough. But so far, I think I'm following.
All right. So one could go further and work out the thought of a philosophical mathematics apprehended through concepts instead of the assumed determinations from which the method employed by the understanding derives ordinary mathematics. It is because mathematics is the science of the finite determinations of magnitude, which are supposed to remain firmly and consistently in their finitude, and may not go beyond these determinations, that it is essentially a science of the understanding. And since it is capable of realizing this science in a perfect manner, it has the advantage over other sciences of this kind of not being contaminated by the admixture of heterogeneous notions or concepts or empirical application. It is always possible, therefore, that the concept may establish a more exact awareness of the guiding principles of the operations of arithmetic and the theorems of geometry. So this is one of the most interesting things that he says, in which, as far as I'm aware of, nobody has really done. people have intimations that category theory may kind of be doing something like this. What I know about category theory makes me not buy it. I don't buy it at all, honestly. Because I don't think category theory is really dealing with the objects that are uniquely mathematical. In a way, it's too general. So, when you want to have like a philosophical mathematics, Hegel will give the example in a couple paragraphs. We won't read it though. One of them is the Pythagorean theorem, which he says it's a speculative theorem of geometry. And he also gives a speculative theorem of the circle through the Pythagorean theorem in coordinate geometry, on the Cartesian plane. And the reason he gives for that is actually pretty interesting in that, there are operations that you can do with a right triangle such that you can take an incomplete determination and fully derive a single triangle's determinations from it as to all its relationships and qualities, and then you can undergo a process by cutting a right triangle into another right triangle down like the peak, and you will regenerate the exact same proportions of that triangle on both triangles that are cut out of the one triangle. So that's a very unique thing to the triangle in geometry. It's probably the only one. Well, Hegel knew only of that one. He mentions only that one, and that's probably the only one that there is. It's the only one that you need, quite frankly. There's only two fundamental shapes ultimately in geometry: the triangle and the circle, and they're incommensurable with each other on the level of the understanding, anyways. And the fact that Hegel links them as being able to provide derivations for each other is interesting. So that would be one of those famous speculative contradictions. What I would count as philosophical mathematics would be something like being able to prove something directly from the concept of numbers, for example. Can you derive from the pure concept of numbers evens and odds? Can you derive from the pure concept of numbers primes? Can you derive from the self-relationships of evens and odds or primes something about the self-quantification of these quantities, which would be the exact same across all number systems, no matter what you do? All ways in which you could represent the number systems, bases. Those would be what I have hopes of being philosophical and mathematical things on a pure mathematical basis. Hegel does not really give any intimations of that there are such things. He leaves it open. He says, he leaves it open that there may be such things. But this project is not a project of mathematics itself. We won't expect that mathematicians will be the ones who really grasp onto this, because it's not what they're doing, since the objects of mathematics are themselves pure abstractions of the understanding, through the intuition of time, turned into abstract intuitions. And what they do is they work with these objects which themselves are not conceptuals, they're not concepts. We're not going to expect that these produce concepts. It's just not going to be possible. We construct theorems, we take whatever objects are given, or that we decide to, put together, and that's that. And he says mathematics is perfectly fine with that. That is the nature of its objects. That's the nature of its operation. Not much more can be expected of it. If we ever would desire to have these speculative theorems, mathematical theorems, we're going to have to wait for some weird Hegelian that wants to play conceptual mathematics, which is a tough one. I have these vague hopes that maybe a particular branch of mathematics, what is it called? The math of clocks. There's a specific name for it. Modular arithmetic. So modular arithmetic seems to me, on the face of it, after giving it a couple, about a dozen hours of like playing around with it, seems to have a promising avenue to perhaps having such concepts, but only within a very limited strictures, in which, like, you don't have an endless sequence of numbers, but rather you have a repetition of numbers. You have a wraparound, and this is why certain specific properties arise by making it cyclical. And anything that's cyclical kind of has the shape of a circle, if you want to represent it that way. And if a circle's speculative, then, well, things on a circle may very well be speculative. I have a thing that I've wrote years ago now that I never finished, which is why I haven't published it, which is just me trying to explain why this is a promising avenue. As far as other things like the Pythagorean theorem, which are mathematical theorems, well, they're not mathematical. Geometry is mathematical, but it's not pure math. It is a measure. It's a science of measure. And I think that stuff like the Pythagorean triangle on the physics level, we will only find in something like a science of cymatics, which is the inherent relationship of motions in a material constraint of bodies. And that most certainly can and should be done, but nobody, as far as I know, has done it. It's a very niche thing, which not a lot of people work on. And you don't have to be Hegelian to end up doing it. You just have to be interested in mathematizing these relationships, because we know the relationships exist. We just haven't had anybody particularly interested in looking at specifically this in the context of matter. I know that the pure geometries as such are studied under harmonic theories. So skip to C, place in motion. So with space, we had development of the dimensions, then we have the totality of space, and then what is space outside of itself, non-spatially? Well, it is time. And then what's time outside of itself? Well, time falls apart back into space. So we go from space to time, back time to space. We have the space-time unity, which is a real inherent unity, as opposed to something like what Einstein would say, where like you have space plus time, but you don't have anything about space such that space is inherently connected to time. You just have this external relationship in which, well, there's a mathematical relationship. If I move in space at a certain rate, I move through time at a certain rate. If I move through time at a certain rate, I move through space at a certain rate. Or I don't move through space. The less I move through space, the more I move through time. The more I move through space, the less I move through time. That's a completely external thing. He assumes that the empirical evidence is, quite frankly, awful for that, even if you take it to be true. Basically, the whole link of time dilation is a whole bunch of nonsense. So space in itself is the contradiction of indifferent juxtaposition and of continuity devoid of difference. It is the pure negativity of itself in the initial transition into time. Time is similar, for as its opposed moments, held together in unity, immediately sublate themselves. It constitutes an immediate collapse into undifferentiation, into the undifferentiated extrinsicality of space. Consequently, negative determination here, which is the exclusive point, is no longer merely implicit in its conformity to the concept, but is posited, and is in itself concrete on account of the total negativity of time. This concrete point is place. So this is a distinction we don't make in our regular language, but apparently Aristotle sort of makes this distinction, that place is a temporalized space or a spatialized time, whichever you want to put it. They're always together. So a random abstract coordinate in space, if you put a coordinate graph in 3D across the entire universe, you're able to point out any spatial position, and you could have an indifferent temporal reading, which will make no difference because no difference is obtained in space as such. But a place is different. Earth is a place. Earth only exists in a specific space at a specific time. If you're at the right place but at the wrong time, Earth isn't there. 5 billion years ago, supposedly, Earth wasn't here because the body of Earth literally did not exist. If you go, somewhere about 10 billion years in the future, supposedly, Earth won't be here because the body of Earth will be swallowed up and burned and turned into fuel by an expanding sun. So Earth is a place that only exists at a space at a time. Within Earth, there's also other sub-places. United States only exists at a certain space and a certain time. You go back 400 years ago, well, the United States doesn't exist. It's not here. You may be at the right space, but you are certainly not at the right time. And likewise, in the future, it also won't be there as well. So, pretty clear distinction. It's a very good one. Unfortunately, in English, we just don't have this distinction, and place is just another synonym for space. I try to actually maintain that distinction in my use of it, because I think it is a very useful one. Though a lot of people wouldn't find much of a use of it. Like, the intuition is close enough with space.
When it's in the form of a verb, I think this meaning's implied. When somebody tells you to place a cup right here, for example, it's implied that they mean right now at this space or place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, usually people mean temporal location. Meet me at this place. They qualify with the time.
All right. Begins matter motion. I used to think that the first chapter was. Okay, no. So it still continues. It's just like, for some reason, like, it's all in the remarks, even though this should have been like subsections, because there's more development than just place. Like, motion comes up here. So 260, skip the addition, 261. Initially, the place, which is thus the posited identity of space and time, is also the posited contradiction set up by the mutual exclusiveness of space and time. Place is spatial, and therefore indifferent singularity, and is this only as the spatial now, or time. As this place, it is therefore in a condition of immediate indifference to itself. It is external to itself, the negation of itself, and constitutes another place. This passing away and self-regeneration of space in time and time in space, in which time posits itself spatially as place, while this indifferent spatiality is likewise posited immediately in a temporal manner, constitutes motion. To an equal extent, however, this becoming is itself the internal collapse of its contradiction, and is therefore the immediately identical and existent unity of place and motion matter. One of the most fucking dense paragraphs you're going to get out of this at Hegel. Jesus Christ. Because the expansion of it is actually pretty long. But the movement is quite simple. It's just explaining it is kind of odd. So initially, we have the place. The place is which is thus posited identity of space and time, is also the posited contradiction set up by the mutual exclusiveness of space and time. Place is spatial and therefore indifferent singularity, and is this only as a spatial now or time. As this place, it is therefore in a condition of immediate indifference to itself. It is external to itself, the negation of itself, and constitutes another place. So because place is temporalized, it is a space which, by its nature, becomes another space. The moment you place something, the placing of a place has already changed it as a place to another place. It's just like the now. The moment you say now, it's gone. You're another now. But that's exactly what the now does. That's what it is to be a now. Place is the self-temporalization, the becoming of space into another space, which is another place. And it doesn't happen first here, then there, or if a when and then. It happens now. The moment it is placed, it is already another place. And that's what it is to be a place. That's like the consequence of the place. Which is why he calls it motion. Well, when you have a place that has become another place, you have a place that has changed to another place. That's literally just what motion is. Motion is, in the regular understanding, a thing is first here, then it is there. And so long as there's a difference, minute as it might be, the thing has moved. So a place which places itself, the self-negation of itself, this passing away in self-regeneration of space and time and space, in which time posits itself spatially as place, while this indifferent spatiality is likewise posited immediately as temporal manner, constitutes motion. To an equal extent, however, this becoming is itself the internal collapse of its contradiction. It is therefore the immediately identical and existent unity of place and motion, that is matter. Yet again, the formal movement in which you have the substantive form of a thing, and then you have the dynamic form of a thing, the active and the static. Or here, the static and the active. The static is the place. The dynamic is the motion. The active is the motion. The substantial is the place. They're two sides of the exact same thing, and they co-constitute themselves. So, insofar as insofar as a place is placed, the very fact of this placing is motion. A place. It's a double negative. It's a place that places itself, so it treats itself as if it's not itself, relates itself as an other, which is still the same thing. But that's exactly the contradiction of motion. You're in a place, you're two places at the same time, which are not each other, but at the same time they're one and the same through motion. And then motion is, just like time, it collapses back into the substantive static place, or places. And you just have this regeneration. And then when you understand this, well, what is a place that moves about itself? Because here we were talking about the universal categories of this kind. Well, if a place just moves about a place, which is just a movement about itself, this is spatially a circle. And this creates resistances between one space moving around itself and another space moving around itself, which, even if you just take this as a quite literal execution of these functionalities of these spaces, if one space is spinning about itself, it encloses a region of space. If another place is spinning about itself, it encloses another region of space. Whether they spin in the same direction or in opposite directions, their spin actually excludes each other, no matter what. So that these regions now resist, and that's exactly what matter is. Hello, Ed. We're in the middle of a reading, but we're almost done. Just give us a couple minutes. So this is to me the most clear as day explanation of what matter is. That perfectly makes sense. Nothing else ever made sense. Everything else is matter is this thing related to space. Matter is mathematics. Matter is all kind of fluctuating strings in the 27th dimension. No. Matter directly arises out of space and time. And the whole thing is reversed. It's actually like he will say, there is no such thing as an unfilled space that is not filled with matter, and a time that is not, the time of a material body. It is space and time that are abstractions of matter, not matter that arises and is built from space and time.
I have some clarification. So, place places itself, and this process is called motion.
Yeah.
But how do we get from motion to matter? Is it the unity of place and motion?
Yeah, it's the unity of place and motion, where a place that moves, and when you absolutize it, it's a place that moves, and places itself in a circle. Logically speaking, it doesn't have to be physical, a spatial circle, but it literally also will make spatial circles by necessity. And that's what matter is. It's once a place has moved upon itself as a place, it's a circular motion. Therefore, it's an enclosure of place from another place, causes resistances by its own motion.
Okay, I get it.
You can literally you can get a bucket of water or a tub of water, make counter vortices or vortices on your own that go together. They will create this mutual resistance with each other, no matter what. That's sort of the only the physical metaphor that you can give. That's very intuitive for it.
Right. And this also solves the problem of physicalism, which appeals to atoms, which calls into question motion in space, place.
Yeah, because they're completely connected, and this also creates a position where atoms don't exist. You can always deconstruct space into further spaces, material bodies into more material bodies, and you can integrate them infinitely. And this is a metaphysical position, yes, and there's nothing that any empirical experiment can do to prove or disprove this, because it's not an empirical question. It's just purely logical. If somehow, for example, somebody could prove that there was such a thing as a Planck length, what that would prove is that we're not in a real world. That would be a proof of that we're in the Matrix. Because a world of actual matter will have no such limitations. And that's it. That's the whole chapter. That's all the logical movements. The stuff in the remarks is some kind of interesting stuff. He talks about how time is quite literally a circle. That the perfection of time, natural time, as embodied in space, is quite literally a logical circle, and that all space bends back upon itself as space, and even though it extends infinitely, it always returns back to itself in its own otherness. Even though it just keeps running away into otherness. But the thing that we think about psychological time as past, present, and future, it is also that way in a more full sense, in that the essences of things, their concepts, already pre-exist their individual bodies, such that when you have a seed, its destiny is already there in the seed. And because it is already there, the seed can go ahead and develop according to that genetic development. Get to the point where, you take the orange seed, you grow the whole tree, blah, 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 and it produces more oranges. And within those oranges, guess what? The seed. So what was the temporal aim of the seed? itself the past, the logical past. And the only distinction is at one point you have this past as a potential, and then you have it as actual. But that's the only distinction of time. The actual existence of that past is not in question. The future of that past is not in question. So the past is the infinite future is the absolute past for Hegel. God already pre-exists us. Everything is aiming towards the realization of, divinity. But that's already actual. It's always already been actualized. So it's very interesting.
There's an edition that mentions Zeno I want to read, maybe on my own.
Oh yeah, he says Zeno is right. So addition, one place does not merely imply another. It sublates itself into becoming another. The difference is also a sublatedness, however. Each place is for itself only this place, so that all places are the same, and place is the simply mediated here. Something occupies one place and then changes its place, passing thereby into another place. But both before and after this, it does not leave, but occupies its place. Zeno enunciated this dialectic within place when he demonstrated immobility by saying that to move was to change place, but that the arrow never leaves its place. This dialectic is precisely the infinite concept, or the here, for time is posited as being implicit. There are three different places: the present, that which is to be occupied, and the vacated. The disappearance of the dimensions of time is paralyzed, but at the same time there is only one place which is common to these places, and invariably throughout all change, and this is the duration which is in immediate accordance with its concept, that is motion. This demonstration of motion is self-evident, for the intuition of it coincides with its concept. Its essence is its being as the immediate unity of space and time. It is time realizing itself and subsisting in space, or space first truly differentiated through time. We know, therefore, that space and time belong to motion. Velocity, which is quantum of motion, is space in relationship to a specific time elapsed. Motion is also said to be a relation of space and time. It was necessary, however, to grasp the more exact definition of this relation. Space and time first attain actuality in motion. So it's just talking about the arrow paradox, which is the most... it seems Hegel thinks that that's the most pure of the paradoxes that he poses. Particularly with as regards motion explicitly. With the arrow paradox, it's just that if we just take one moment of time, time being change or rates of change, however you want to define it, at any moment, a thing is in its place and fully occupies its place. But when does time happen? When does movement happen? Because what we have there is kind of the frozen... that reality is like the frozen strips on a film, or frames on a video. Each frame is a totality of reality, and you say, "Oh, well, time is the rate of change of those things." So if it is the spatial is the substantial reality, when can you say that the when ever happens? When do things move? How do things move? And like Zeno could not make sense of it, and he was right. And Hegel. I think in the lectures of the history of philosophy, Hegel goes to bat on behalf of Zeno and vindicates Zeno and says Zeno is right to have chosen to disbelieve in motion, as opposed to everybody else who just took it for granted. And they're like, no, Zeno is crazy. Obviously motion is real. Like, look, I can move my hand and all these other things. There must be a problem with Zeno's understanding. There was a problem with Zeno's understanding. But Zeno actually understood a true conceptual problem. Whereas everybody else who's been like, oh yeah, we can answer Zeno, we can move our hands, I can do calculus. All those other people don't even step on to the field of the concept where the problem even is. So, yep. I've actually never read chapter 2, so that'd be interesting to read through. Next time, though.
Yeah, this is really good stuff. I'm gonna have to read it over again just to solidify my understanding, but way above the stuff you find in physics classes.
Yep.